Surely you have heard the phrase which pretty much sums up this entire rather lengthy passage from John's Gospel. There are none so blind as those that will not see. I'll say it again. There are none so blind as those that will not see. It really goes to show that it has absolutely nothing to do with our physical capacity to perceive through our physical sight. Because all our physical sense of sight does is take in the data of the world around us. Color, shape, form, whatever it is that we are looking at. And yet, we need to put it all together, and we find meaning in that. And it is in the meaning that we begin to understand the world. And sometimes we refuse to understand. And that's what that phrase really talks about. And it really summarizes in a very real way what Jesus is getting at in today's gospel lesson, what John is describing for us in today's passage. This man that is presented to us in John's gospel was born blind. And Jesus comes along and he works a great work, a great miracle. In the time of Jesus, this would have been seen as some great tremendous act of compassion, some great work beyond some medical feat. Even the man himself professes it was not known that anyone born blind could receive their sight. That implies for us, of course, that perhaps it was known among others that people who were seeing and who lost their sight for whatever reason, perhaps disease or some other malady, could be restored to sight through the act of a physician or some other healer. But it's someone born blind, never had the capacity to see in the first place. And it was not unusual in the time of Jesus, particularly in the culture of Jesus, to understand that someone who lost this capacity or someone who never had it in the first place suffered because of evil, because of sin. And so the disciples asked Jesus at the very outset of this story, why is this man blind? Is it because of his sin or the sin of his parents? So the answer seems self-evident, because if the man was born blind, how could it be because of his sin? The child, an infant in the womb, cannot sin. And so the implication is somehow it was because of his parents, or his parents' parents, or his ancestry. Somehow along the way, somebody participated in some great evil, and now God is working out the curse on the innocent child that comes into the world. And Jesus says, ultimately, this is utter nonsense. That this does not happen. This is not why this man is blind. Not because of his sin or the sins of his parents, but perhaps, Jesus says, so that the glory of God may be seen, the power of God may be made manifest. And so Jesus works this great sign. Now we may see this as a great healing miracle, a great sign of Jesus, and we see this man being restored. And that's actually something about this story too we don't really kind of get. Because you see, if we understand this the way the people of Jesus' time would have understood it, that this was somehow the work of evil and sin in this man's life or in this man's family's life, we begin to understand too that this was not only an act of physical healing where someone who was not sighted now can see, but rather that this man also would have been seen to be at best, a second-class citizen, or worse, would have been pushed to the margins of society. Because if this is the result of evil and sin, you had no rightful place among good people. And in fact, though he still had his parents and probably was cared for by his parents, obviously they were part of his life, that in fact, as they disappeared from his life, perhaps taken from him by death, he would have ended up to be little more than a beggar. He had no place in society. He was not useful to anyone. He would have been relegated to the corner of the streets. He would have been at the city gates or perhaps the temple entrance, rattling a can or a cup, and dependent, borrow a phrase from literature, upon the kindness of strangers. The only way he would have survived. Now, Jesus did more than simply give him his sight. Jesus, in working this great sign, also restored him to life, restored him to his family, restored him to his community, restored him to a usefulness in society, restored him to a new and lasting life far beyond this man's imagining. Not only beyond his imagining that this man now could see things that he never saw in life before, but now it could blow his mind. He wouldn't be able to understand what was going to be new about his new life. So he went from seeing his future as being nothing but a beggar to being something he could never really even imagine even now. This is what Jesus did for him. And yet, others around him could not rejoice with him. Even his parents cowered in fear, because of the others and what they were thinking. You see, they couldn't wrap their head around the fact that this Jesus, this new teacher, would be so bold as to give this man sight, as to restore this man, and to do so, of all things, on the Sabbath. How dare he? How dare he do such a good work? Oh, there's the tale of Beelzebub there. There's the telltale sign. It must be from the devil. Because even this great and mighty work that Jesus is doing, it's on the Sabbath day. He's breaking the law of Moses. So it is evil after all. So we don't need to accept it. We don't have to recognize it as the great good that it is. And so we will reject it. And we will reject him. And the man. And his parents. And we'll throw them out of the synagogue. Throw them out of the community. Push them to the edge. Push them to the margins of society. All because they don't measure up to our standard. Notice what happens too when all this happens. The man doesn't really even remember who did this for him. No wonders. Something like that happened to you. Would you remember all of this going on? So who seeks him out? It's Jesus. Jesus goes looking for him. When he heard what happened to him and to his family, he is the shepherd. He's the one described in that psalm that we sang together. He's the one that goes off looking. He's the one who goes and looks for the man and seeks him out and says, "Do you know who's done this for you?" And he says, "No, I don't really. I don't remember." He says, "It's me." And he falls down and worships. The man comes from a life where nothing is in his future? Nothing. And he sees everything now in Jesus. He sees. Not only with his eyes, he sees with the most important organ of all. He sees with his heart. You see, it's interesting. Neuropsychologists are studying how we use our senses. And they tell us that people who are deprived of one sense or another actually can sense the world in ways that we can't imagine. That people who cannot see can actually hear color or feel color, can sense the world and sense differences among things that you and I can't imagine. Those of us who can see, who are sighted, we can't imagine how they see the world. But they see it nonetheless. Perhaps that's what Jesus is doing here too. He's showing the man a different way to see the world. To see it not only with his eyes, now that he can sense red and green and blue and form and shape and depth, but he sees it now with the most important thing of all, his heart. And he sees that what Jesus has done is not just a great miracle, a great sign, but he does it from the most important motivation of all, compassion. Compassion. To reach in from one heart to another, to speak from heart to heart, and to teach love. To reach out, to restore, to make whole again. That is the highest calling. And that's what Jesus is doing. And that's what the Pharisees cannot see. That the law of God is not about the Sabbath, nor is it about following one regulation or another. But it's about living a life that sees, not with the eyes or any other sense, but with the heart. A life that sees from compassion and touches the hearts of others and embraces with love. This is the core of our faith. This is what Jesus wants to do with you. He wants you to see. He wants to touch your eyes so that you can see anew. Not with a new pair of glasses, not with a surgical procedure, or with some smeared mud or saliva, but to reach into your heart so that you see with eyes that God gives you. The eyes of compassion. Eyes that only the cross can give. Eyes that come only from that kind of love where one lays down one's life for one's friend. This is the story. He seeks you out. Can you see him now? Reach up. Touch his face. Perhaps for the first time. See him like you've never seen him before.